Daniel Broadley is a multi-hyphenate creative and the director DP behind the Oasis tour content, whose take on postcards, the static, documentary-style frames became such an integral part of how the tour was captured and received worldwide. In this episode, we get into how this style developed mid-tour, the moments that were nearly missed, the efforts he and his crew went through to make sure nothing ever was, and how a single unscripted frame said more about the tour than any fast-paced recap edit could. I'm Jack Munch, and this is Making Pictures.
Daniel, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm very good. You know what? Before this starts, I thought I would just show you that I dug out my original
yes,
OG
the
branding.
Original, the faded. Is that the one that was originally red and yellow?
Yes, and now it's gone a sort of horrible off-white color.
No,
I use it
I
for
love
running, but I was going through some old clothes and I dug it out, but it shows just how long I've been invested in these platforms.
Well, I appreciate that. I'd love to know kind of what you've been working on recently, what kind of projects you've been doing.
Yeah, so I mean, just jumping back, I spent the whole last year touring with Oasis, and then I kind of woke up this year thinking that I definitely don't want to be on the road doing that kind of thing. I made it a conscious effort to take on projects that weren't necessarily music related, and so I went and DP'd a FIFA commercial over in America and directed my first TVC for Starbucks, and those two projects took up a good chunk of the year, just with pre-pro and the nature of the jobs themselves. And then I'm currently in the midst of working on a commercial for Rag & Bone, which is a denim brand out in New York, doing some sort of like music crossover commercial style work. So it's been like a really busy year, and really nice for it not to be solely sort of recap music related content.
You're, I guess, one of these people who has what seems an infinite amount of kind of creative avenues to take, because you're director, DP, editor, colorist. You've had some music projects as well, right? But you've been creating music and touring with your own artist project, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, the band I was in, we sort of ceased being a band about 3 years ago now. I mean, that's the reason I have such a passion for making music related content. I think it's because I myself am a musician, and actually more recently that's come into play, because on the Oasis tour, a big part of how I was making the recaps feel a little more, I guess, just differentiating them from what everyone else is creating, was creating my own sound design within the kind of Oasis tracks and remixing some of their songs and restructuring, I suppose, which is amazing. And having that kind of music knowledge from a production sense and a songwriter sense allowed me to do it without ruffling any feathers or creating something which felt dishonest or disingenuous to the band themselves. And most people don't really know I was doing that, I don't think. I never really shout about the sort of sound design, music side of things. It's just at some point when you're writing down the credits on Instagram, it starts getting silly, and you just think, well, I'll just list.
But it's just your name repeating.
Yeah, it's kind of And don't get me wrong, I had a bunch of other people working on that project to aid me with those things. But I think it does. At some point, I don't need to be credited necessarily. I'm not trying to advertise myself as a sound designer. It's something I bring to my own projects, but totally has come from the last 10, 15 years of playing professional music, I guess.
Would you be able to maybe, off the top of your head, talk about like specifically what you kind of added?
Yeah, totally. I mean, the two that come to mind, the Dublin recap.
And enjoy the people. Means everything like
I remember I used the Shock of Lightning track. I wanted to build anticipation, and the track didn't really allow that, because it's kind of, in classic Oasis form, kind of hits you with a punch in the face straight away. So I kind of just started taking things away and adding them back in, and putting kind of like a base of strings or kind of synthetic strings underneath as well to create a pad. And then the sort of most extreme version would have been the final Wembley recap, where I kind of constructed an entire reimagining remix, inspired kind of by the Adidas advert that they'd done for the Oasis tour. I really like that they used Live Forever, and they kind of found a way to make it feel quite cinematic when the song itself is definitely more a traditional rock song. Yeah, just creating beds and layers of strings and synths. And taking a lot of the vocal layers and making them sort of sound like washed and reverbed, and then adding percussion in, adding claps in, adding the kind of sound of the stadium. I even got the audio engineer from the tour, Callum, who was doing all the kind of audio capture, and sent me the overhead mics from the gig. So I had the crowd singing, and I kind of blended that in. It was fun to do, and also difficult because I was on tour whilst doing this, so I had very little time. So I was just like hammering away in the mornings at coffee shops.
I've got lots of questions about that, but we'll get to that in a minute. love to know the music and filmmaking background. What was the first professional route you took? Was it more music or was it more film when you first started?
It was both, really. I mean, I kind of, whilst in college, I studied filmmaking. I did a diploma, and then I did a foundation degree, and then a full BA degree. But actually, that was all to kill time. I was in an emo rock band in Plymouth, and I just wanted to DOS it, doing something in the city, getting the student loans, and just touring and playing local gigs. And it wasn't that I had no interest in filmmaking, but I was really only interested in making skate videos. So I was like, well, I'll study that. It'll be semi-effortless because I already have some understanding of it. It's not like a completely new field. It's not academic in the same way that doing a science degree would have been. But in the final year of studying, I really found my feet with mixing music to visual. And so when I graduated, I was very desperate for money, and I just started offering music videos to local bands I did 50 quid for the first one. And then when I finished that one, 2 bands approached me because they saw it on YouTube, and I charged them 100 quid each. And I just kept doubling the rate until at some point the band started to wince a bit. And I was like, well, that'll be the level I sort of cap it at. And I graduated. My last bit of student loan I spent on a Canon 550D and like the nifty 50 £100 lens, and I kind of built my whole career off those two items. When I graduated, I shot a few music videos for an artist called Cosmo Jarvis. And if you don't know the name, he's the guy who just starred in the Shogun series, and he's now a very well-known actor. But he at the time was a musician, but he's also directing his own music videos. And then he persuaded his record label or his management to give him 10 grand to make a feature film that he would then sell. He would give away with his latest album, I think it was. And so I DP'd his feature film, his 10 grand feature. I was on £30 a day. And he was my film school, really. There was no rules. He needed a scene in a supermarket, no permission. We just went to the supermarket until we got kicked out. It was just the most amazing, fearless way of filmmaking. And from someone who was relatively timid, after that point, I realized that you can get away with just about anything if you just beg for forgiveness rather than ask for permission. And that became the motto. And I think that's how I made such headway in the music video world, because I just didn't have any fear. I was playing the student card for a long time. I still looked like a student. So if we got kicked out, I'd be like, I'm just making a student project, sorry. And so for 2 years, I just would spend 3 or 4 days a week making music videos. But I learned everything from that feature film experience, which was, and I don't think you can find that film anymore.
And then when did live music enter your rotation of projects that you were working on?
Do you know what? For a short while, I think at the moment, live content is probably one of the most important tools for an artist to have. I think it's become like the new music video, I guess. It's the way they can advertise themselves online without needing to self-generate their own content, right? It's like they can't hold the camera whilst they're doing it. So that becomes someone else's responsibility. And artists love that. They love when it doesn't have to be them generating that content. And I think at one point, I think, I'm not saying it was below me, but it wasn't really a job that was, a recap film for Instagram. They weren't really a thing even 5 years ago to the degree they are now. So I never really thought about it. I was capable of it, and I'd done a bunch of live films, like multicam films and stuff, and music videos created from a live gig. So you run around. It wasn't until I had a quiet period and I got invited to shoot Sam Fender at his first hometown stadium show, and I had a really good time. But seeing the edit when it was done, I was like, wow, this is a powerful, powerful film. It's like really dramatic. I was seeing that through the way people were complimenting me, through the work, and it culminated in me doing Sam's winter tour. I had a quiet December, and they invited me to shoot his whole arena tour at the end of 2024. And I thought, you know what, I've had such a great run with this so far. People have really enjoyed what I've created. Like, I'd love to maybe see what I could do on a tour. And at this point, I think I'd noticed in those 3 years or 2 years of working with Sam, how much more important this content was becoming, how many more eyes were on these types of projects. So I went on the tour. I was comfortable enough with the team that I felt like I could kind of do my own thing, follow my own instincts, and they wanted just great content to go out. So I had that freedom. I wasn't being like overly backseat driven, I guess, by managements and labels and things. And I think because I was allowed to flex and do that work, at the end of it, that's what got the attention of Ignition, the Oasis management and label, was just that work alone. And I think it just goes to show that when you're not kind of like micromanaged by like lots of other people, and you just get to do what you want to do and what you feel capable of, that can lead to great things.
So the work that Ignition saw, these were the recap films?
I think it must have been the recap films. I also it was a bit of a cobbling together of sorts, but like a music video for Sam's single from all of the tour footage.
What was their initial kind of creative brief for you? Did you go in and did they say, we would like you to do the same thing for us that you did with Sam, or was it because I read on your Substack that you, and I'll link it after for anyone watching, that Dan's got a great Substack article about how he shot the Oasis tour, but you mentioned about how you pitched how you would shoot the Oasis tour. Yeah, what kind of conversations were they having? What did they want from you to start with?
I think the general consensus was the tour sold out in seconds, and do they really need social media presence? In what capacity does it need to be anything important? It's just the gigs are the gigs. But Sarah, who's the head of creative, Sarah Mansfield at the label, she kind of saw beyond the general sense of like, you know, it doesn't need to be this, not throwaway footage, but like ultimately the gigs were happening. I don't think anyone thought they needed to like create content that needed to match the kind of the level of what those gigs are doing. I saw this as an opportunity that what we could do is create this window for anyone who wasn't at the gigs to have an experience of what that might have been like, and a relevant one, and one that didn't make you feel like you missed out necessarily, but really was just a cinematic retelling of the moment, I suppose, to some degree. It took a lot of persuading to get everyone on board with the idea that it didn't need to just be iPhone clips and moments of songs in the set, that it could be these moments that if you were at the gig, it would be the same feeling you had when you were there. And if you weren't at the gig, you get to experience it in a way that made you feel included. And I think that because no one knew what the tour was going to be like, right? No one knew, you know, that they were going to, if they were going to walk out together. It's been well documented at this point that there was just like a lot of tension in the air about what this was going to be from audience alike as well. No one knew on that first Cardiff show what was going to happen. And I think within that, we as a sort of social media team were quite low in the priority list of like what we were asking to, you know, whether it was access or what we were trying to create. And we were quite hindered on the first two shows just because of the nature of how important they were and how much stress and pressure there was. For me, it was so important that we got it right because of the importance of the band and the importance of the moment and the cultural relevance of it all. I wasn't going to let it become this bit of content that felt anything less than the standard of Oasis or this idea of Oasis. And so I kind of went rogue a little bit on the first one beyond the mandate that I was given, you know, in terms of like, access is limited, don't move around too much, don't be a problem to anyone. But I've been on enough tours and been to enough stadiums with Sam and that I knew I could get around without creating a problem, but also give me enough to create something that was gonna be great. And I think that doing that first one and getting out of the way suddenly just like created a much different, you know, precedent for the tour. I think the team realized what this could be, what it could offer. And I think with that came more access and more eyes on the what we were doing and more trust, I think. But it unfolded as we went along, honestly. The initial pitch deck I sent in had loads of ideas, and I think the whole project just was ebbing and flowing. And again, I thrive on that. I think if I'd been a new filmmaker or someone who was only been doing it a couple of years, the whole thing would have freaked me out. But I'm so used to projects changing and shifting, and, you know, one day you've got the entire thing figured out, and the next day someone throws a spanner in the works, and you're like, right, let's start from scratch. And not mourn the loss of that stuff, but just treat this as a new variable, a new kind of like creative approach.
And also, I guess tours are, if you're on it from like beginning to end, you're in a kind of constant state of production, and those ideas naturally have to change because, you know, one night you shoot a show one way and then you realize maybe that wasn't the right way to approach that song or that set or that moment. So then you change from show to show, and then your initial kind of concept of what you thought you would be documenting this show to be ends up changing completely.
Massively. And I think there was also a big part of that because the show largely remained the same. The set was so rehearsed. That's why they sounded so good. But it was like up to us to kind of figure out ways to create the variables so those recaps didn't all feel completely like copy and paste and, you know, didn't become wallpaper by the end. And a huge part of that was the cultural differences of how far they were traveling. You know, it was one day you'd be in Dublin and the next day you'd be in like Tokyo or Melbourne. And I think it was leaning into those. And again, I had all this knowledge and wealth of knowledge from doing tourism films, being in kind of different environments and sort of thinking about what it is we need to do to find that variable in a 1 minute recap. And it was a good challenge, and it became hard at points. There were some points where you felt like you'd kind of given your best, and you'd do a couple shows and you would be like, I don't feel like I'm finding the people, or I can't find the story here, because it's maybe not as alarmingly different as somewhere like, Seoul or Tokyo. And then you go to somewhere like Melbourne or Sydney and it's much more Western, and you feel like you've already covered that in the UK, but the UK's got the kind of importance of Oasis. And in those moments as well, it was like leaning on my team. You know, it's worth shouting out that I had myself and Joshua Hulling were the sort of creative directors of the project. He was sort of covering the photography side of things. I was covering the video side of things. And then we had Harriet Bowles was the other photographer. And then we had Jay Davison was the other filmmaker who came on as sort of like as additional operators or photographers, but they also bring with them a wealth of creative ideas and knowledge. And I think in the moments that I felt very stuck with a recap, where I'd felt burnt out because I'd kind of given everything to Tokyo and Seoul, was sort of bringing Jay in, and who has great edit skills as well, and saying like, can you sort of instill some of your creativity in this? Can you find a new way to tell this story? And he had that fresh energy to kind of treat it as a project that for himself, and that helped, I think, keep them interesting.
Let's talk about the postcards, because I think this is what a lot of people would have seen. I feel like even if I hadn't, I would have seen these postcards kind of around online. For anyone who hasn't seen them, explain the concept, but explain also how you approach the concept with this tour.
Yeah, so I think the postcards weren't necessarily in our original pitch deck, but we had these ideas of these moments. We hadn't really put a name to them yet. They were going to be sort of slow zoom moments of cultural things happening around Oasis, and frames that could tell you multiple things in one go. There was one clip from a filmmaker who was zooming in on this Liverpool celebration parade. It was like some kids on a roof trying to look into the game. There was like red smoke coming out from the celebration, I think, and you could see the Anfield in the background. It told you everything in one go, and I was like, what? That's amazing, and like we should try and incorporate these frames somehow into Oasis. And the idea was to always like to fold those into the recaps, because our only mandate initially was like to recap the shows. So Cardiff was easy, it was 2 shows, but then Manchester was 5 shows, and there was the first weekend was 2 shows, then there was a break for 2 days, and then a show on Wednesday, another break for 2 days, and then another weekend. And after the success of the first 2 shows and how much, I mean, it was just the most amazing thing to witness. The management were quite itchy to get something out. They're like, can you put something together? And so I put a small recap together, and I realized that if I put a small recap together and then the next thing that comes out is another small recap at the end of it, there's nothing to really like differentiate those things. It's going to start getting wallpaper, and there's so many ways you can tell the same show. And I'd seen all these postcards years ago, or this format used in tourism films. So like a whole wave of filmmakers from Instagram who kind of like adopted these static moments. And I always thought that that'd be a really cool thing to bring into the live world. No one was doing that. And, in fact, that year alone, we'd had like probably some of the most energetic recaps I'd ever seen. There was like a Coachella recap, where it was just like every filmmaking technique you'd ever imagine. It becomes so popular to do these crazy edits that I was so fatigued by it. Even myself, I was like, I just done the Sam Fender tour, I was doing these Oasis ones, and I needed something we could create that was not going to be too much of a workload and wasn't going to be an edit. So I suggested that we did these portraits, these kind of like these static portraits. We called them postcards, and we scout the kind of the grounds and find interesting people, interesting moments. And because it was the Wednesday show on that run of Manchester shows was reduced capacity, so I believed it was going to be like a less busy, maybe less energetic show. So I was like, we could just try this. We could spend the whole show just solely doing statics, like no one shoot anything else but just statics, and the end of it we'll curate it and see what we get. And it ended up being great, and we put them out just as a way to break that week up. I didn't even know if we were going to continue doing it, but it went down so well and got so much traction that I think instantly it was like, we now have to fold this in to everything we're doing, which at the time was exciting but also daunting, because some places you're going and they're playing one show and you have to do a walkout edit, a recap film, the postcards, a drone show the night before. It was just so much content to do in one day. But again, a challenge that we sort of took forward.
Whenever I've toured with an artist, I'm always on my own, and I'm shooting photos, video, social content. And I always feel like I've never got enough, because I'm either shooting photos when I want to be shooting video or vice versa. Even though you've had 2 shows prior to that, was there a sense while you were trying to shoot those postcards on that third show, a sense of kind of like, are we like not doing enough here? Should we really just prioritize this? Do you think, I think we're confident I've got enough with the other 2 shows, we'll get enough with the next 2?
Yeah, I think it's tricky. I mean, we were running on pure adrenaline and instinct. We shot 4 shows at this point, and I think we had a really good understanding of where in the set things were happening. There was certain songs where there isn't much going on, so you use those as kind of to travel and get somewhere else. And there were certain moments where you knew, people are going to cry and don't look back in anger. People are going to all do the Poznan, the jumping up together in cigarettes and alcohol. The first 4 songs are just like bangers. That's all the beer throwing. That's all the kind of crazy crowd shots. So there was an obviousness to it in terms of like what you should be looking at in those moments. But I think some things just happened, and it was like happy accidents, and it was learning to just stand still and just think, hope that something was going to happen, or just believe it. Because I think when you're shooting recaps, you're just trying to get as much as possible. You're just as many angles as you can find. It's all about quick cuts and variation. And I think the postcards was a different thing, where you weren't going to get a good postcard unless you just waited. And it was quite a scary thing to do, because you could spend a whole song you might find someone who's really interesting, but they're not doing anything interesting, and you can't prompt it from them because they're enjoying the show. It's documentary. So you just hold the frame and believe that maybe something will happen because of the nature of an Oasis show. And there was a guy who was in a wheelchair with his friend, and they both had Oasis shirts on. And as I walked through the crowd, I saw them singing together. And as I found like a sort of point where I was not being, intrusive to them, but they'd stop singing together. And I had to wait like a whole song pretty much to another chorus, hoping they would just do it again. And they did, and it was great. But I remember the panic, thinking like this might not happen. And many times it didn't. But and even on stage, I remember I was just shooting like Noel. I just held for a static of Noel. I was like, something might happen here. And as that happened, Liam just walked past and fist bumped him, and it was like just perfectly in the middle of the frame. I remember my instinct was to find a different angle because Noel was moving out of frame, and I was like, if you move, you miss the kind of the moment as it's about to happen. You can't use the shot if it's just the exact thing. You have to kind of get the build up to it, and it was a real learning curve. And for everyone that went out, there was also dozens of postcards that were fluffed, that either nothing happened or we moved away and the moment happened, or But one thing I will say is that, and what you were saying about like having to do it all, I was really lucky that I had someone like Jay there, and I also on that first time we tried postcards, I brought in Charlotte Alex, who's a amazing photographer for Sigrid, and she does loads of artists. She does Inhaler and all sorts, but she'd done her work with Sigrid, and she'd been sort of using stillness as a real tool. And I remember thinking like, it's so powerful to hold a frame. It's really confident, and it's also like, it's like nostalgic beyond belief. Like they created a camera. You couldn't handhold a camera when they were first created. They had to be on a tripod. So the earliest versions of cinema are all static shots with something in the frame happening. So there's a real sense of like timelessness beyond the measure of timelessness, and she'd really mastered that with Sigrid. So I got her to come along for this, and Jay as well. Like I think at the end of that first time doing it, any of my panic about what I didn't get was alleviated from seeing what those guys captured, and the trust of, as a director of the project, I can't monitor whilst I'm working. I'm leaving them to their own devices. So there's this trust, and you then encourage that further. So like Jay would show me what he'd got, and it would be involuntary, but I'd be so excited about certain things that he captured instinctually, like his compositions or his moments, that I think that then encouraged that further, in terms of the next show. He'd be like, oh, that's the stuff that created a reaction, so I'm going to look for that stuff. And by the end of it, we had so much time to learn the format and how to do it, but like we both felt really proficient at finding these moments and being still for them. And it was really exciting. We realized we made a mistake in Toronto. There was a show there was a thunderstorm, and it rained like the heaviest rain I've ever seen during a gig. And we were both shooting for the recap that night. And I remember Noel asked, he's like, oh, I can't wait to see the postcards from that gig. And I remember thinking like, we didn't get any postcards from that gig. We didn't do that. It was, we just kind of like saw the energy of the rain, and we're like both shooting for recap. So from then onwards, we would tandem. So if there was any gigs where there was two shows, one night one would do recap style shooting, much more energetic, handheld, more camera movement, and the other would do postcards. And then so that way we wouldn't miss, if something really important happened, one of us would have it in each format. Especially when the postcards gained popularity, it was like you wouldn't want the most talked about thing to happen at the gig to be a part of the recap when you need it for the postcard.
So for the gearheads, I'd love to talk about how you shot them in terms of like filmmaking. The shot itself, like holding a camera still, isn't anything revolutionary, but if you tie it all in with context, the composition itself, the lenses you were shooting with, what was happening in front of the camera, color grading, when it all comes together, it created this beautiful image and moment. And some of those wide shots of the crowd, I think, because they were on such wide lenses, you're seeing this moment, like you said, how you're used to seeing live is more of that recap style where it's high energy kind of edit. So it's not often we get to see these shots in this way, still no movement, just kind of letting a moment play out. Can you talk about what lenses you were shooting with, what cameras you were shooting with?
So I started the tour with a Fuji X-H2S as my kind of primary camera. I still stand by it. I think it's one of the most beautiful, like mirrorless sensors you can get. Super 35 sort of goes to full frame with the speed booster. And I shot a good portion of the initial tour on that camera and only switched it out for the FX3 as the tour progressed. The time of day was, it was getting darker earlier. And we realized that we just weren't going to be able to get the crowd shots we were getting previously without having that 12,800 dual base ISO. And I think the image is richer on the Fuji. I missed a bit of the depth and contrast that I was getting naturally through the sensor on the Fuji. But you can do a lot with color grading, so it didn't affect sales. Lenses wise, I'm not like a expensive gearhead. I really early on, I remember shooting a lot of 35mm stills on my Pentax. Spotmatic, and it had the Super Takumar lenses, and then very quickly realized I could adapt those to my cameras. And so I got really used to using SLR glass and kind of always stood by it. You know, I've always opted more for that style of lens. And so for the tour, I have a set of Zeiss Jenners, which the multi-coated versions, which I took with me. And I also have this Tokina 28-70, I believe it is. Essentially, it's like an ATX Pro, I think it's called. It's like a really old 90s DSLR zoom, horrible body, really short focus throw. But there's a rumor, I don't know if it's true, that it's like Tokina bought out Ingenue when they went under in the 80s or early 90s, and they just used this amazing Ingenue lens as their lens and just rehoused it in this horrible DSLR body. That became like a real workhorse because it was like, it has the look of a prime, it's f2.8, the short focus throw and the short zoom throw on it. It's actually quite useful when you're running around by yourself. I was also using an old B4 mounted broadcast zoom, and this was more out of necessity, really. I think when our access wasn't given to us in the initial shows, I needed something really, really long, and I didn't really want to buy a Canon 600mm. I also just didn't think it would be that sexy and interesting. I never like shooting the 70-200 as it is. I just find it a very lifeless image. So I adapted this B4 zoom, which became, I don't know what the equivalent was, probably like 20 or 30 mil to like 500 mil or something. First, it was a necessity just to get close enough to the band without being in the pit, because we weren't allowed in the pit really. Afterwards, it became a style thing because I could crash zoom with it and get all these kind of really cool whips, and it just became a really cool lens. Then there was the Petzval lens. I had the 80.5 that I'd used on the Sam Fender tour in the original like brass housing that it was in from Lomography. I didn't realize how important that lens was going to be. On the arena tour, I felt like it was too wacky. It was like so swirly and so broken. And so I really had it as an effects lens just to kind of create variation and things like that. But what I realized was at the stadium, there was so much room to get separation from the subject, whether that was the band on stage or the pits were so large because they were expecting so much surging and stuff. I could get so far away that actually all the swirliness, the further you get from your subject, the 3D pop of the subject being really far from the background. So it doesn't feel as like dramatic as like, you know, when you're like a few feet from someone and it goes really kind of crazy. I used it just a few times in Cardiff to get some effect shots. Then I was like, actually, this is like, it's just really beautiful. It's like it just feels like almost anamorphic, where it's not like, it doesn't feel like an effects lens now. It just feels like a really stylistic prime lens. And so that became a really important lens. And when I used it at Manchester, I remember getting on stage for the first time. They gave us access to one show for one song. And I went up for cigarettes and alcohol when everyone was jumping up and down and the beer was flying. And I shot it in 100 frames, I think it was, just to get as much real estate in that moment as possible. Because I was like, I've only got one chance to be up here. I'm just going to get it. And watching that footage back and what it was doing to the background, it made it feel like this dream. Like it wasn't like a dream effect lens, but it just felt heightened beyond the reality that was happening. Like all the beer, when it was thrown, it was hitting the corners of the frame and becoming just this sort of like sloshy, painterly nothingness, and the hands were on the edge of the frame, which is becoming like pixels and movement. But contextually, you had the center to tell you what was going on because that was all in focus. It offered something I'd never seen a lens do. Suddenly it became a really important lens. And I think when we did the postcards, and those moments weren't just like quick whips and things, and they were actually sort of held for a moment. There was so many questions saying, what is this lens? Like I was getting more questions about that than I was anything else. And so I realized it was obviously creating a bit of conversation and a bit of a discourse. Mm-hmm. Which I love. I knew at first I was like, it wasn't about gatekeeping necessarily, but I just didn't want just create this like sea of people just adopting that, sort of taking that format in exactly the way it was offered.
I think you found a sweet spot with that, the Petzval lens on stage with where they were in comparison to the audience, because there is a formula to where the foreground subject can be in the background, where that effect doesn't really happen so much. And I think it's the same with the Helios. It doesn't always give you that effect, but I think you obviously found the right sweet spot for it to give you that dreamy effect.
Totally. And actually the temptation with those lenses is just to crank it open to like 1.9 or 1.7 or whatever they are and get the full effect. But actually when you start dropping them down, you still get an effect, but it's a lot more palatable and less obvious. And I think that's where like you can capture the subject in a way that doesn't feel distracting.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned that Noel or Liam asked you, like, oh, I'm excited to see the postcards from this show. What was their initial feedback or initial response?
It's a funny story. I'll share it. I can't remember which show it was, but myself and Josh were called in to see Noel, and it was during one of the gaps. There was like 3 or 4 days off or something. Maybe it was when we were moving cities, and I asked what it was about, And they were like, we don't know. He doesn't usually ask to see people, so could be good, could be bad. In fact, I think their exact words were like, he usually only wants to see people if he's telling them off. So my initial panic was that I maybe had overstepped my mark with the recaps and manipulating their songs and whatever. I just wasn't sure what it could be. But actually, it was just, you know, a whole week of sweating basically, and the walk to his dressing room was particularly nerve-wracking. But he wanted to tell us how much he was enjoying what we were creating, and he wanted to offer us more access, and he was just excited by the whole thing. I think for maybe the first time perhaps people were approaching him and telling him, I've seen this, and I think it's really cool, or I really like it and stuff. And so, and I guess he's seeing the footage as well and seeing how he's being presented and how this experience is being presented, you know, because where they have the strangest vantage point from it all, right? They see it from the stage and only the stage. There's a whole wealth of this cultural stuff happening. And obviously where Oasis ended in 2009, it was a very different version of a fan base then. You know, it was a lot more associated with the kind of football crowd, a lot more rowdy. But what this ended up being was this sort of like, it's like Woodstock, you know, it's just like strangers like loving upon each other and, you know, grown men crying and so many kids, you know, I guess this whole new generation found them. And I think the recaps offered them an opportunity to see what was going on beyond their view from the stage in the same way that the audience was also seeing that story being told. My hope was we were finding the right things that represented that story, you know, in the best possible way. And so his excitement grew as the tour went on and how we were presenting that. And it gave us a real fire in our step to think, okay, if it's being approved by the people that we're making it for, then we're doing something right. You know, we're doing right by them, we're doing right by their project, and it just gave us a real enthusiasm to continue to push that as far as we could. And so yeah, it was great to have their kind of blessing and their encouragement, I think.
Yeah, the access is important, isn't it? Because without that and without their blessing and without their trust, you're stuck to the pit or out in the crowd. To be able to be on stage with them during those moments is really important. Important for them, but to be able to get some incredible footage, it's important for you guys as well.
Definitely. And I think as a filmmaker at heart, beyond just a content creator or something, or content capture, I think I'm always looking at ways that what we need to tell the story, the amount of angles or the kind of vantage points, or, you know, it's like the obvious thing when you're making a film of like a conversation being like a, you know, a close, a mid and a wide or something. Of course, it's not a format you have to stick to, but there are elements that help tell a story. And I think Access gave us the opportunity to just tell that story a bit better, to kind of like to build that geographical picture of what the gig felt like to be there, rather than just being in one spot. For one, you know, the front row is that elite spot, right? But I think there were so many moments happening at the back of the venue, or like in the, you know, up in the rafters. I mean, there's one moment in Australia, I think it was. I went up there to get like a wide shot of just the crowd jumping up for a song, and I just saw these two kids who were like had their front torch on their camera, and they were just screaming the lyrics at each other whilst like filming themselves with these torches. And from where I was stood, you just saw like they were illuminated by these phone torches whilst they were singing, and they were shirtless and grabbing, you know, I was like such a cool moment I was so lucky to be there for that moment, to see that happen.
And there's that shot of the dad holding their child with the headphone or the earmuffs.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful
so many
well.
Kids like sleeping and like on their shoulders and stuff, and just people, interesting people everywhere. The great thing about the Oasis thing, it wasn't like diehard fans at the front and then like casual fans at the back. It was like diehard fans everywhere. So generally speaking, I mean, you have to still search for it, but you could find such interesting people no matter where you ended up. It was fun to just go for a wander and just be like, I wonder who I'm going to see. And 9 times out of 10, you'd find someone. Sometimes you wouldn't, and it'd be stressful and you'd waste half the set walking around, but usually you'd find these interesting things happening. And again, it was this patience of like, I feel like something's going to instinctually something's going to happen here, but I don't know what it is. And if it's not going to be to this song, but the next song it might be. So that's an interesting person. If I just wait or come back in 2 songs time, they might be doing something interesting, and sometimes that would pay off.
Do you have a favorite postcard from any of the shows? Anyone that sticks in mind?
I think the one that sort of did the rounds was the man at the front row of Don't Look Back in Anger crying and singing, which I think was in Chicago. He was just having this moment. I remember I would have missed it, but Harry was shooting and she nudged me to turn around and I was like, wow, kind of found an angle as quick as I could. And again, he's just so lost in the moment that it was completely uninterrupted. And the beauty of being on like an 80mm lens is that I was far enough back while still kind of, and the Petzval kind of creating that isolation of him in amongst everyone. Because even in the foreground, it was helping just you really center your focus to him and not the people next to him. But he was having this amazing moment. I remember shedding a tear because I didn't know what he was going through or whatever, but seeing a grown man like that cry was quite powerful. And there was plenty of people crying at these gigs, but something about the way he was letting it all out in that moment was like something else. So that to me is probably my favorite one. And there's hundreds that I love, but it's, yeah, that one feels really special.
From your Substack article, you mentioned about Meta asked you guys why you were sharing them in a certain aspect ratio.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate? Because obviously I know that I'm sure they saw that these assets were performing very well, so they were then questioning why you weren't doing it in their like native format.
Yeah, Meta were confused as to why we weren't doing anything in 9:16. First of all, the stage. Everything about the gig was horizontal. Like it was such a wide, the screens, they outstretched further than any band's ever done. I think it was like the most screen space or something. And you just can't get that in vertical. Like you'd be right at the back. It'd be all sky and all feet. So there was a big conversation about that. I don't know if I subscribe to the idea that the algorithm favors 9:16. I think the artist can dictate that in somewhat as well. I felt like my instinct was that Oasis shouldn't pander to any kind of thing, really. It's like, they should do things their way and let the world kind of come to them. And even us putting the black bars on the side was a nod to like the idea that we see all the archival stuff with Oasis on with the black bars, because it's like all shot 4:3 back in the day. I think Meta were just asking why. And I think we just went back and said, like, it's not the way we're shooting this. And I think our hope was that they maybe think about making their platform a little bit more accessible to other formats or other aspect ratios. You know, all I want is that you could, on any video, just like have the ability to like enlarge it and turn your phone, just clicking on it, let it come big. I think all of us are sick of 9:16. It makes total sense if you're shooting on an iPhone to be like, it's just you're wasting real estate. I don't get excited by a vertical image. If I ever try and shoot it, I'm not inspired. I've tried turning the camera sideways. I've tried everything to like find a love for it. And I just don't, it just feels like a lot of things in the frame I don't want to see. I also think that like at some point we will be out of this world of 9:16, and all this footage has been shot natively for that. It's just gonna, like, how do you repurpose that for like something else then?
We're not far away from Instagram giving you an option to turn your phone and then going that way, because all of the platforms are trying to become each other. Instagram, well, they've just launched a TV app, and they're going to move into more episodic content and series, and they want people to create shows. So that like you just said, all of that vertical content, that's not going to live on there, because it's a horizontal format that they want to compete with Netflix and YouTube and the streamers. So
that's very interesting. I think it's potentially quite a powerful thing, because I watch short form series based content on YouTube, on Instagram. I find myself gravitating towards like episodic, tutorials, or people vlogging about films and things like that. And that's what I mean. The whole thing's changing.
I agree. I think it's an exciting time for creators and filmmakers and anyone that is, I guess, looking for a way to create something more than what the platforms offer them, because YouTube is also, they're just launched a series option as well. These creators can go and create whatever they want, and they're getting massive buy-in from the audience and from the studios themselves. So I think we're not far away from just it all becoming one. The studios are making their films and TV shows, and the creators are making their own content, and everyone's creating it to such a high standard, and you can access it from everywhere. You can go and watch it on Instagram or YouTube or Netflix. I think they're all competing for attention, and I think they're all looking for that high quality of work. So it means that creators and directors and people like you and me could try and make something for a series on Instagram, and then that all of a sudden is a production that could be seen by a larger audience. So I think there's a lot of opportunity out there.
That's really exciting. I think ultimately when something's high quality, it will pull people in. Like I think this idea of second screen watching and like dumbing down TV shows and stuff. I think some of the greatest shows ever come out, they've ignored all that and they're excelling. And then it's like, actually, I think it's always the way of people don't give audiences enough credit for being intelligent enough to kind of, see something for what it is. And I think the fear is always going to be from people at the top, people spending money, I think, is like how I want a guarantee. It's like there's no guarantee when you're mixing art and money, I don't think. It's like we don't know why we're receptive to certain things. And I think I've certainly learned that, like when to push and pull with the fear of people who are spending money, whether it's execs or client or agency or whatever it is. Like, there's a time and a place to be scared about something not landing, but if it cripples the kind of core of the thing, you're going to end up with nothing. I know Nolan's like, it's a hard example to think, because but The Odyssey is a brilliant film. I saw it the other day, and it's like, everyone's always like, why shoot in IMAX? Well, it's like, it's not, good art shouldn't be easy, I don't think it should be. I think there should be, and what his film shows is that like the result of that, it might not be perceptible, but it kind of is, because everyone's drawn to it. But like I think the discipline of shooting, of making it hard, created it brought a different energy to everyone, the actors, the set designers, everything. And I think the same with everything now. We're trying to make things easier for everyone, but really, I don't know, I think the good stuff happens when it's a little bit harder to make.
For sure. Regardless, quality is always going to win. And I think as creatives, we should always be pushing for the highest quality, and that should always be the main goal, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I'm hoping I can be an advocate for that as well, and like stand my ground in places where I feel like my creative sensibilities overrule the fear. And I think I think it's part of my age. I'm just getting a little bit less scared to make that known in the bid to create something great. If I feel like the project's going to be sacrificed because of the fear, like I'll step in and try and alleviate that. Not in a confrontational way, but I think I've been part of too many projects where I've let the fear make bad work.
So no more tours in the foreseeable, and you've got other projects coming up. Do you have a dream project? Like, have you got projects you want to do or things you in mind where you want to take things?
I think life has surprised me so much in the last 5 years. Where I thought I would be is not where I am. I would love to shoot a feature doc at some point. I would love to try narrative at some point as well, to try to sort of bring my sensibilities from all this documentary commercial filmmaking into a narrative project. But whether I will, I don't know. I promise myself every year I'm going to shoot a short, and then the year goes by and projects come out of the woodwork and you just get swept into things. I'm excited I feel like I'm finally in my stride of filmmaking. Like I understand where my strengths are. I understand what I think I'm good at, and I think I'm excited to see where that might take me now. Like these projects I'm creating feel more true to me, and so I'm hoping what that offers is more opportunities that are based around what I can bring, whatever that's going to be, in whatever format that's going to be. I think filmmaking's changing dramatically at the moment. The AI is one conversation, but I think it's also just because of the formats and where people's attention spans are, and we're seeing a lot of confused, is cinema's dying? Actually, no, it's never been stronger, and streaming's kind of having a funny moment. They're trying to figure out what to do. So I think it's just being receptive to what the world's doing and just applying your best instinct through filmmaking, which is what I'm trying to do to kind of fit within that, and not to get too swept up in trends and to what everyone else is doing, and just keep going back to what makes you excited to pick up a camera. And that's what I'm trying to do. Like, if the project's exciting for me, if I'm thinking about like, I can't wait to get in there with the camera and pick it up and shoot, that's a good testament to do the project. And if it's filling me with dread and uncertainty, it's probably not the right project. And I think I'm fortunately in a position where I can be a bit more choosy and just take on those projects that really, satiate my creative soul.
So for anyone who was looking to find out more about like your work and kind of what you're working on, where can they find more about you?
My Instagram is probably the place I'm most active. And then with that, you can find my Substack and my website through the links in the bio. I'm relatively contactable as well via DMs and email. And yeah, I'm excited to create more work. And if people find me through this, that's amazing, because I welcome more creatives and filmmakers.
Amazing. Well, I really appreciate your time today. I'm looking forward to seeing all the next projects and what you've got coming up in the future.
And thank you so much for having me.